My name is Clara, and I'm 31 years old. This time last year, my world had been beautifully, chaotically, and completely upended by the arrival of my son Leo. I was a new mother, running on caffeine and stolen moments of sleep, but my heart was fuller than I had ever known it could be. I was also, at that time, the owner of a fledgling small business that was my other baby, a source of pride and terror in equal measure. I thought I knew what joy was, and I thought I knew what hurt was. But I never imagined that being deliberately excluded from my own niece's christening would be the catalyst for the single most transformative moment of my professional and personal life, a moment that would redefine the very meaning of the word family for me. Before I dive into the whole story of how a single, devastating social media post led to a shocking boardroom reveal that changed everything, I'd love it if you could let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in sharing this. And if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated by the very people who were supposed to be your biggest champions, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm in good company. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes our greatest strength is forged in the fires of someone else's neglect. To understand why the christening felt like a physical blow, you have to understand the landscape of my life, which was dominated by a single, towering mountain. My older sister, Megan. Growing up, our family was a solar system, and Megan was the sun. Everything and everyone orbited her. She was bright, she was loud, she was successful in all the ways that were easy for our parents to quantify and brag about. She got straight A's, she was the captain of the debate team, she was voted homecoming queen. My parents, practical people who valued security above all else, saw Megan's path as the blueprint for a successful life. I, on the other hand, was the quiet moon, reflecting a softer, more diffuse light that they didn't quite know how to interpret. My talents weren't academic, they were artistic. While Megan was memorizing formulas, I was learning to mix colors. While she was writing essays, I was sketching in the margins of my notebooks. My report cards were a source of gentle concern, while hers were framed. My art was called a nice little hobby. Megan's debate trophies were displayed on the mantelpiece. It wasn't malicious, not in the beginning. It was just a fundamental misunderstanding of value. They saw my creativity as a charming quirk, a girlish pastime, not a viable future. I remember our shared birthday party when I turned 10 and she turned 12. We were born in the same week, a fact that led to years of forced joint celebrations. That year, Megan's side of the cake was a grand, store-bought castle. My side was a lopsided, homemade flower garden because I'd insisted on decorating it myself. The presents were a study in contrasts. Megan received a state-of-the-art telescope, a chemistry set, and a gift certificate for $100 to her favorite clothing store. Her gifts were about ambition, about looking outward and upward. I received a sewing kit, a set of pastel-colored pencils, and a book on flower pressing. My gifts were about domesticity, about small, contained, quiet things. I remember my father clapping Megan on the back and booming, "That's my future astronomer." He then turned to me, patting my head, and said, "And that's my little homemaker." He meant it kindly, I think. But the words drew a line between us, a line that would only grow deeper and wider with time. This dynamic solidified in our teenage years. Megan was effortlessly popular, gliding through the treacherous social hallways of high school with an unearned confidence. I was more of an observer, happier in the art room than at a pep rally. I once spent a month nursing a secret, profound crush on a boy named Kevin, who had kind eyes and a crooked smile. I filled a sketchbook with drawings of him. I finally worked up the courage to talk to him after school, only to find him by the lockers, laughing with Megan. A week later, they were a couple. When I cried in my room, my mother's form of comfort was, "Oh, Clara, don't be so dramatic. Megan can't help it if boys just flock to her. It's not her fault." It was the family mantra. It was never Megan's fault. My feelings were always an overreaction, an inconvenience to the smooth, sunlit path of Megan's life. The prom was another milestone etched in my memory, with the acid of quiet humiliation. Megan, of course, had a date months in advance, and a dress that cost more than my father's first car. It was a shimmering, sapphire blue creation that made her look like a movie star. I didn't have a date, but my friends and I had made a pact to go together. I decided to make my own dress. For weeks, I labored over it. I chose a deep emerald green velvet, and I designed a simple, elegant silhouette with delicate, hand-stitched silver embroidery along the neckline. I poured all of my love, my skill, and my quiet defiance into that dress. When I finally put it on, I felt beautiful. I felt like myself. I walked downstairs to show my parents. My father whistled. "Well, look at you, Clara." But my mother's smile was tight. She circled me slowly, her eyes narrowed. "It's very creative, dear," she said, the word creative sounding like a euphemism for strange. "Are you sure it's appropriate? Megan's dress is so classic. You just have to be careful you don't stand out for the wrong reasons." The implication was clear. My own two hands had created something strange, something other, something that might embarrass them. I wore the dress, but a part of its magic had been tarnished. At the prom, I saw my mother fussing over Megan, adjusting her corsage, telling everyone how proud she was. She barely glanced my way. Our paths diverged even more sharply after high school. Megan went to a prestigious business school 3 states away, her tuition and living expenses fully covered by our parents. It was an investment in a sure thing. I was accepted into a well-regarded art school in our own city. It was a victory that felt entirely my own, but it was met with deep sighs and concerned looks from my parents. "Art school?" my father had said, rubbing his temples. "Clara, what kind of a living can you make with a degree in painting? It's not practical." They offered to pay for a community college business course instead. I refused. I took out loans. I worked 2 part-time jobs, waiting tables and stocking shelves at a craft store, to cover my materials and rent for a tiny apartment. My life was a chaotic tapestry of charcoal dust, turpentine fumes, and exhaustion. Megan would come home for holidays with stories of her sorority sisters and business case competitions, her life sounding glamorous and important. My stories were about discovering a new glazing technique or finally affording a tube of expensive cobalt blue paint. In the family hierarchy, there was no contest. When my future husband, Mark, and I decided to get married, we knew we would be paying for it ourselves. We had a small, lovely ceremony in a public garden with about 30 of our closest friends and family. I designed the invitations, I arranged the flowers, and I even baked our wedding cake. It was a day that felt authentically us. 2 years earlier, Megan had married her college sweetheart, a man from a family whose wealth made ours look modest. Their wedding was the social event of the year. It was a spectacle with 500 guests, a 10-piece band, and an ice sculpture in the shape of a swan. Our parents had contributed a staggering amount of money to the affair, taking out a second mortgage on their home to ensure Megan had the fairy tale she deserved. For her wedding gift, they gave her a check that was, as my father proudly announced in his speech, a down payment on their first house. For our wedding, they gave us a high-end set of pots and pans. "Something you'll actually use," my mother had said with a knowing smile, as if my life was destined to be one of practical, domestic struggle. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, his fury a warm, protective current against my skin. I just smiled and said thank you because that's what I always did. Then came the babies. In a strange twist of fate, Megan and I found ourselves pregnant within a few months of each other. A foolish, hopeful part of me thought this would be the great equalizer. This, finally, was an experience we could share, a bond that would transcend the old patterns. Motherhood would be the bridge across the chasm that had formed between us. I was wrong. Megan's pregnancy was treated like a royal confinement. My mother and she had daily phone calls, discussing organic nursery linens and high-tech baby monitors. My calls with my mother were filled with anxious questions. "Are you and Mark financially prepared for this? A baby is so expensive, Clara. And with your little art business, are you sure you'll have a reliable income? Maybe you should look for a proper job with benefits." The concern was couched in love, but it felt like doubt. It felt like they were already anticipating my failure. Through all of this, Mark was my rock. He saw the dynamic with a clarity that I, steeped in it for my entire life, couldn't always muster. "They don't see you, Clara," he would tell me gently after a particularly bruising phone call with my mother. "They see a reflection of their own fears about security and convention. Your talent scares them because they don't understand it. It has nothing to do with your worth." I knew he was right, but the child in me still yearned for their uncomplicated, unconditional pride, the kind of pride they gave Megan so freely. After Leo was born, I was adrift in the beautiful, terrifying sea of new motherhood. The nights were sleepless, the days a blur of feeding and changing and rocking. Amidst the chaos, my art became my lifeline. I started designing and creating bespoke baby items, hand-painted wooden mobiles, custom-embroidered quilts, and soft, beautifully tailored baby clothes. I poured all my love for Leo, all my artistic passion, into these small creations. I started an Instagram page, more as a way to document my work than anything else. I called it Leo's Lark, a tribute to my son, my little bird. To my surprise, people started to notice. I got a few orders, then a few more. It was small, but it was mine. It was a seed of independence, a quiet declaration that my nice little hobby could be something more. I dreamed of growing it, of turning it into a real, sustainable business that could support my family. I knew I needed capital to do that, to buy materials in bulk, to build a proper website, to maybe one day hire some help. That's when I started looking into small business grants. Most applications were complex and demoralizing, demanding business plans and financial projections that felt like a foreign language. But I found one, a local foundation dedicated to supporting female entrepreneurs. I spent weeks perfecting my application, photographing my work, and writing from the heart about my vision for Leo's Lark. I sent it off with a prayer and tried to put it out of my mind. A month went by and I heard nothing. I assumed it was a lost cause. Then an email landed in my inbox. It wasn't from the foundation. The sender was a law firm, Davies, Finch and Associates. The subject line was Private Investment Inquiry. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought it was a mistake or worse, a scam. With trembling hands, I opened it. The email was brief and formal. It stated that a client of their firm, an anonymous angel investor who went by the initials JB, had seen my work and was interested in providing seed funding for my business. The amount they proposed was 50 times what the grant had been offering. It was a number so large it didn't seem real. I read the email 5 times, then showed it to Mark, my voice a whisper. This can't be real, can it? He read it, his eyes wide. Clara, this looks legitimate. This is a real firm. The terms were unusual. JB wished to remain completely anonymous for the time being. All communication would be handled through the lawyer, Mr. Davies. JB required a simple email update on the business's progress on the first of every month and a single in-person meeting after 6 months to review the company's growth. If I agreed, the funds would be wired to a new business account within the week. It felt like a dream, a strange, unbelievable fairy tale. Who was JB? How had they found me? My little Instagram page had only a few hundred followers. It made no sense. But the lawyer was real, the firm was real, and the offer was sitting in my inbox. After a frantic, excited conversation with Mark, we decided to take the leap. We had nothing to lose. I emailed Mr. Davies back, and true to his word, the money appeared in my new business account 3 days later. I stared at the number on the screen, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of the kind of power and possibility that I imagined Megan felt all the time. With JB's investment, Leo's Lark was transformed. I was no longer making quilts on my living room floor, surrounded by baby toys. I was able to rent a small, sunlit studio space in a converted warehouse downtown. I bought an industrial sewing machine, sourced the finest organic fabrics and merino wools, and hired a web developer to build a beautiful, professional e-commerce site. Orders began to pour in, first from our city, then from across the country. I was working harder than I ever had in my life, juggling the business with caring for Leo, but I was incandescent with purpose. I was building something real. The next few weeks passed in a fog of hurt. I threw myself into my work, the studio becoming my sanctuary. The rhythmic hum of the sewing machine was a balm to my frayed nerves. My monthly email updates to JB were clinical and professional, detailing my sales figures and production schedules, betraying none of the personal turmoil I was experiencing. The 6-month mark for my in-person meeting with my mysterious benefactor was fast approaching, and a new kind of dread began to settle in my stomach. I felt like a fraud. My business was thriving, a runaway success by every metric, but I felt like a personal failure. How could I walk into a meeting with a powerful, successful investor when I felt so broken, so small? I practiced my presentation, my voice shaking. I felt like a little girl playing dress-up, about to be found out. The day of the meeting arrived, gray and overcast, mirroring my mood. The address was a sleek, glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. My sensible flats echoed nervously on the polished marble floor of the lobby. I took the elevator to the penthouse floor, my stomach churning. The doors opened onto a hushed, minimalist reception area. A young woman with a headset smiled politely and led me down a long white hallway. "JB is waiting for you in the corner office," she said, her voice a respectful murmur. She opened a heavy glass door and gestured for me to enter. The office was breathtaking. 2 entire walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city sprawling below. The furniture was sparse but exquisite. A massive oak desk that was more like a work of art, a low-slung leather sofa, and shelves filled with books and what looked like abstract sculptures. A figure was standing with her back to me, gazing out at the view. She was tall and slender, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I clutched the portfolio containing my business reports like a shield. "JB?" I asked, my voice barely a squeak. The woman turned around slowly. Time seemed to slow down, the air thickening. My blood went from hot to ice cold in a single, sickening jolt. It was her. The elegant, silver-haired woman from the christening photographs. The woman holding my niece at the baptismal font. The godmother. Judith Barrington. 1,000 thoughts crashed through my mind at once, a chaotic, terrifying pileup of confusion and fear. This had to be a trap. A sick, elaborate joke orchestrated by Megan. Had Megan asked this woman to invest in my business out of pity, as some grand charitable gesture to her poor, struggling sister? Was she here to tell me it was all a game and pull the funding? My carefully prepared presentation, my sales charts and growth projections, all felt utterly ridiculous. My hands grew clammy, and the portfolio slipped from my grasp, scattering papers across the expensive rug. She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Her expression was unreadable, her intelligent eyes taking in my panicked state. She gracefully bent down, gathered my scattered papers, and stacked them neatly back into the folder before handing it to me. Her touch was brief, her hands cool and steady. "Clara," she said, her voice calm and even, with a low, resonant timbre. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Please have a seat." She gestured to one of the leather chairs facing her magnificent desk. I sank into it, my legs feeling weak and unreliable. "I'm Judith Barrington," she said, as if I didn't already know. She sat down opposite me, the massive desk between us feeling like a canyon. "But I imagine you've gathered that." I could only nod, my throat tight. You're Isabel's godmother," I managed to choke out. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. "I am," she confirmed. "And I am also JB." The silence in the room was immense, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. My mind was a maelstrom. Why? How? Was she a friend of my parents'? Did she know what they had done? The hurt and humiliation of the christening came rushing back, fresh and raw, now tangled with this new, bewildering layer of intrigue. "I don't understand," I finally whispered, finding my voice. "How did you even know about my business? Why would you?" Judith leaned forward slightly, her gaze direct and unflinching. It wasn't unkind, but it was intensely powerful. It was the gaze of a woman who was accustomed to getting straight to the point. "I understand your confusion, Clara," she began. "Let me explain. I am a very old friend of Megan's father-in-law. We've served on several nonprofit boards together over the years. Several months ago, before your niece was born, I was invited to a small dinner party at Megan and her husband's home." She paused, as if choosing her next words with surgical precision. "Your sister, as you may know, enjoys holding court. She spent much of the evening regaling the table with stories of her life, her husband's recent promotion, their plans for the nursery. It became clear she was particularly keen to impress me. At some point, the conversation turned to family talents. And that's when she mentioned you. My stomach twisted into a knot. I could just picture it. Megan name-dropping her artistic sister to a woman of power and influence, not out of pride, but as another accessory to her own perfect life. She said, "Oh, you should see my sister Clara's work. She's just so wonderfully creative. She can make the most divine things out of nothing. That sort of thing just runs in our family, you know." She then pulled out her phone and, with a great deal of performative flair, showed me the Instagram page for Leo's Lark. Judith's eyes held mine. Your sister, Clara, was using your talent as a social currency. She was attempting to decorate her own reputation with your gift. It was, I must say, a transparent and rather tiresome display of narcissism. I flinched, the casual accuracy of her assessment hitting a nerve. However, Judith continued, her tone shifting slightly. While she was preening, I was looking. I wasn't listening to her chatter. I was looking at your work. And I did not see divine little things. I did not see a nice hobby. I saw a brilliant, untapped market niche. I saw an impeccable design aesthetic, a clear brand identity, and a product of exceptional quality. I saw raw talent, yes, but more importantly, I saw a viable, scalable business being run by someone with an intuitive understanding of her customer base. What your sister presented as a charming little pastime, I recognized as a potential goldmine. I stared at her, my mouth agape. The world had tilted on its axis. She hadn't invested out of pity. She had invested because of my work. My work. So, she said, a hint of steel in her voice, I decided to conduct an experiment. I wanted to see what that talent could do if it were properly capitalized. I wanted to see what you would build if you were given real resources, free from the suffocating condescension of your family's unique brand of support. So I had my lawyer contact you. Anonymously. I needed the experiment to be pure, untainted by any personal connection or family drama. The air in my lungs finally returned in a rush. It wasn't a trap. It was an opportunity. A real one. The validation I had been craving my entire life had just been delivered, not by my parents or my sister, but by this formidable, clear-eyed stranger who had seen my worth through the tiny screen of a phone. Then, her expression softened for the first time, a shadow of something like empathy crossing her features. Then, I was asked to be Isabel's godmother. I am fond of the child, and I accepted. But attending that christening, Clara, it was illuminating. I watched your parents and your sister. I listened to the way they spoke of you, when they thought no one of consequence was listening. The casual dismissal. The story of your little sewing business told as a charming but slightly pathetic anecdote. They painted a picture of you as their sweet, impractical, struggling dreamer. She shook her head slightly, a flicker of disgust in her eyes. And in that moment, I realized my investment was no longer just in a business. It was in a person. I had, without a doubt, backed the right founder. The knot of hurt in my chest, the one that had been sitting there for weeks, began to dissolve, replaced by a warm, spreading wave of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of pain. Judith Barrington leaned back in her chair, the powerful CEO persona returning. A crisp, businesslike smile appeared on her face. Your sister gave me your name to show off, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity and purpose that shot straight into my soul. I'm giving you my backing so you can show up. Now, she gestured to the portfolio in my lap. Let's dispense with the drama. Show me your 6-month report. We have global expansion to discuss. I left Judith Barrington's office an hour later in a complete daze. The city streets, which had seemed so gray and oppressive on my way in, now looked vibrant and full of light. I got into my car and just sat there for a long time, the leather-bound portfolio on the passenger seat beside me. And then I started to cry. It was a different kind of crying than the desperate, heartbroken sobs after the christening. This was a flood of release, a torrent of relief, vindication, and a dizzying, terrifying joy. It was the sound of a lifetime of self-doubt beginning to wash away. The dam had broken, and what was left in its place was not a ruin, but a clean, open space, ready for something new to be built. The first person I called was Mark. I told him everything, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. The godmother, the dinner party, the tiresome display of narcissism, the business, the experiment. He was silent for a moment, and then he let out a whoop of laughter and triumph. "Oh, I knew it. I knew you were a genius," he shouted into the phone, and I could hear the pure, unadulterated pride in his voice, so different from the conditional, skeptical approval of my parents. "She saw it, Clara. Someone finally saw it. This is incredible." His joy was a mirror of my own, amplifying it, making it feel even more real. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID read Megan. My stomach did its familiar, conditioned lurch of anxiety, but then I remembered my meeting with Judith. I took a deep breath and answered, my voice calmer than I expected. "Hello, Megan." "Clara." "Hi." Her voice was unnaturally breezy, a tone she usually adopted when she wanted something or was feeling insecure. "So, the weirdest thing happened. I was just on the phone with Judith, Isabel's godmother, and she mentioned she had a meeting with you today? About your little project? Isn't that a small world?" The condescension was still there, a reflex she couldn't control, but it was underpinned by a nervous curiosity. She was fishing. This was my first test. The old Clara would have stammered, would have downplayed it, would have felt a strange need to apologize for my success. But the woman who had walked out of Judith Barrington's office was different. "Yes, we had a meeting," I said, my voice level and factual. "Judith is my primary investor, Megan. We were having our semi-annual board meeting to discuss the next phase of expansion for Leo's Lark." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I had used words like primary investor and board meeting. I hadn't called it a little project. I had called it by its name. My calm, professional tone seemed to unnerve her more than any angry outburst would have. "Investor?" she finally sputtered. "What do you mean, investor?" I just showed her your page for fun. I thought she might want to buy something for Isabel." "Well, she decided to buy the company instead," I replied, a line Judith had used in our meeting, and I felt a thrill of power in repeating it. She saw potential in it. The subtext was clear. She saw potential that you did not. I didn't need to say it. The silence on the phone said it for me. Megan mumbled something about her baby crying and hung up. I smiled. The power dynamic, which had been so skewed for 3 decades, had just begun to tilt. A few days later, my mother called. The transformation in her tone was breathtaking in its transparency. "Clara, darling," she gushed, her voice overflowing with a syrupy, unfamiliar enthusiasm. "Megan told us the most wonderful news. You're working with Judith Barrington. We had no idea your business was so serious. She is a very, very important woman in this city, Clara. Your father and I are just bursting with pride." The sudden pivot was almost comical. The skepticism, the warnings to be careful, the patronizing concern, all of it had vanished, replaced by a desperate attempt to claim a piece of my success. The pride they were bursting with wasn't for me, not really. It was for my proximity to power, to Judith Barrington. It was pride by association. A year ago, this call would have been everything I ever wanted. Now it just felt hollow. Nauseating, even. I was polite. I was brief. "Yes, Mom, things are going well. Thanks." I didn't offer details. I didn't share my excitement. I kept my success to myself, a treasure they were no longer entitled to. For the first time in my life, I was in control of the narrative. A year passed. A whirlwind of a year. Under Judith's guidance and with her formidable network, Leo's Lark grew beyond my wildest dreams. We were featured in parenting blogs, then national magazines. Our products were picked up by high-end boutiques in New York and Los Angeles. I hired a small team, a production manager, a customer service specialist, 2 skilled seamstresses, to help me keep up with the demand. I was no longer just an artist. I was a CEO. I was tired, I was challenged, but I was deeply, profoundly fulfilled. For Leo's first birthday, Mark and I decided to throw a party. We rented a beautiful, airy event space with a small, enclosed garden. It wasn't the opulent country club of Isabel's christening, but it was perfect. It was filled with sunshine, laughter, and the people who had truly supported us. My loyal friends from art school were there, as were Mark's wonderful family. My new team from Leo's Lark came, their presence a testament to the community we were building. And in the center of it all was Judith Barrington. She had declined to be Leo's official godmother, saying with a wry smile that her talents lay in venture capital, not catechism, but she had become something far more important. She was a mentor, a champion, and a beloved figure in Leo's life, a surrogate grandmother who doted on him with a fierce, intelligent pride. She arrived with a gift that made me tear up, a first edition of The Little Prince, with a beautiful inscription inside to Leo about the importance of seeing with the heart. I had, after much deliberation with Mark, invited my family. It felt like the right thing to do, a final, quiet assertion of my new reality. They arrived late, a tight, awkward trio. My parents looked around the bustling room, their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion. They seemed to be trying to reconcile the successful, confident woman greeting guests with the little dreamer they thought they knew. Megan was a storm cloud of barely concealed resentment, her eyes scanning the crowd, sizing up my friends, my success. I saw my father talking to one of my business associates, his voice a little too loud. "We always knew she had it in her," he boomed, clapping the man on the back. "A natural-born entrepreneur, our Clara." I had to turn away to hide my smile. Later, I saw Megan approach Judith, who was holding Leo and making him giggle. "Judith, it's so wonderful to see you," Megan cooed, touching her arm. "It's just so crazy to think that none of this would have happened if I hadn't shown you Clara's little Instagram page that day. It's like I'm the secret fairy godmother of this whole operation." Judith turned her cool, assessing gaze on Megan. Her smile was polite, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, you did show me her work," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the clean, cutting edge of a razor. "You showed me a diamond in the rough. It's just a shame you thought it was just a pretty rock." She then turned her full warm attention back to Leo, leaving Megan standing there, her face a mask of shocked, public humiliation. The fairy godmother had been exposed as the fool. I overheard the exchange from across the room. A year ago, seeing my sister so thoroughly and elegantly put in her place would have filled me with a vindictive glee. But now, all I felt was a brief, fleeting pang of pity, followed by a profound and settled peace. Her opinion, her approval, her reality, none of it mattered anymore. I didn't need her to see my worth. I didn't need my parents' born-again pride. I had built a life, a business, and a family of my own choosing, one based not on blood or obligation, but on mutual respect, genuine love, and a shared belief in seeing what is essential, even when it's invisible to others. I walked over to Judith, scooped up my laughing, beautiful son, and felt, for the first time, completely and utterly whole. Looking back, the journey has been about so much more than a business. For years, I was chasing a form of validation that my family was incapable of giving me. The most painful betrayal of my life, that christening, felt like an ending, but it was actually a violent, necessary beginning. It forced me to stop looking for my reflection in their eyes and to finally find it in my own. It taught me that sometimes, the people who believe in you the least can inadvertently become your greatest motivation. They can open doors for you they never intended to, simply because they are too blinded by their own narratives to see the power you hold. So now I want to turn it over to you. Have you ever had an experience where being underestimated or overlooked by someone actually pushed you to achieve something incredible? How did you handle it? I would love to read your stories of resilience and vindication in the comments below. It's so important for us to share these moments and remind each other of our own strength. If my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your power. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Remember that your value is inherent. It exists whether other people choose to see it or not. Never let anyone else's limited vision define the scope of your world.